All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call, please.
Mrs. Bloom?
Here.
Mrs. Spirito?
Here.
Ms. Laird?
Here.
Ms. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from our regular meeting held November 6th, 2023, please?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Lewis. Could I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Bloom. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Spirito?
Yes.
Ms. Laird?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes, motion's approved. Legislative report.
None this evening.
Okay. No walk-on items other than the couple changes.
Actually, there is an item 33 at each board member's place. That's a personnel issue. And then one correction on item 32. We had a change in dates for resignation. So just, I'll point those out as we get to them.
Okay, as we get to items 32
Thank
and
you.
33. Okay. Moving on to our community section. So hearing of the public, if anybody would like to address the board, they can come up to the podium, just state your name and address for records purposes, and you can. No one? All right. All right, moving on to superintendent's report.
All right, this is going to be a lot of fun. We have a special guest here this evening who would like to fill us in on a program that they've worked on with the high school football team. I'm not going to talk anymore because I want Coach Long to have as much time as possible. Coach Long, would you please come up and tell us about your program this evening?
How are we doing tonight?
Great.
I would like to thank first the board members for everything you guys do for our community and for the schools. Secondly, I would like to thank you for allowing Alicia and I and myself to be able to speak on behalf of what we do with the Fremont football team. Unfortunately, Alicia and I could not be here due to prior commitments. Our program. We as coaches have created a standard that we expect from our players and our program. That being a student athlete who takes pride in being a student first and an athlete second. There are a lot of things that we try to teach these young gentlemen, but the most important thing, how you respect and represent Fremont football. I am very proud to stand here today and express our success, not by wins and losses, but by success in the classroom. We give our players realistic beliefs and goals, such as we state to them 2.6% of athletes go on to play college football. They know we, as in Alicia and I and myself, will do anything and everything in our power to help them achieve their goals of going to college or achieving their dreams of playing football in college. However, we believe it's important to be realistic. The reason I'm here today is to talk to you about the academic weapons. That's the key word that you were looking for?
Yes, sir.
Which was established by Alicia and I and myself 2 years ago. However, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. 8 years I have been head football coach here at Fremont. Never in my mind did I believe we could be successful the way we have and establish pride and success and expectations as student athletes. 8 years ago, Bill Shell and myself established a standard for our football program. I know that the school district does not do week-to-week eligibility. However, Fremont football does. And with that, at the junior high level as well as the high school level, we would look at grades at the beginning of the week, and if a student athlete has 1 F, they sit 1 quarter. If they have 2 Fs, they sit 2 quarters. And if they have anything more than 2 Fs, you're not playing because the expectations isn't being met. 2 years ago, I had a conversation with Alicia Nye, Coach Nye. And her dream and her goal is to be a college advisor with the athletics. And through conversation, I suggested her starting something with the football team. It only built her resume. Never in my mind would I believe and expect her to do the things that she has done with our football program. I offered her a quarter stipend from our varsity football coaching staff just to do what she has done. And it's amazing. She should be a full stipend individual. Never ever did I imagine she would do what she has done with the football program in accomplishing the first evers. Last year, we were all Ohio academic as a football team in the state of Ohio with a cumulative grade point average of 22 top letter winners of a 3.63 GPA. Amazing. 3 individuals from last year's team could have went to academy schools if they chose. 1 did. With that being said, to have 1 is amazing. To have 3 is unheard of. I was like, man, we're never going to be able to accomplish anything like that again. How surprising. Don't ever challenge Coach Nye. Even though the results have not come out yet, and it will be mid-December by the time they do come out, this year, our top 22 letter winners, we will have a 3.81 GPA for the first 9 weeks, which is amazing. Many people ask, what does Alicia Nye do? She works year-round. She takes pride and has expectations for being called academic weapons. I will give you a briefing on what she does, and this is important to know. Everyone needs to know what Alicia Nye does. She double checks during the season. She double checks each individual player's credits and schedules. She checks their daily class, daily attendance, weekly grades. She contacts parents and athletes on progress or non-progress missing work. She tracks down athletes during her plan period or during her lunchtime to remind them to turn work in. Nye created this last year, the key of success, academic weapons. You would be amazed by how proud our student athletes on the football team are. She started accumulating an academic weapon sheet, and we post this every Tuesday at the stadium. You have to have a 3.5 GPA or better to be on the board. And the most we ever had was 48 of our student athletes with a 3.5 or better on our board.
Wow.
You would think this is like the lottery with these kids. They would argue with me if they were not on the board. Because, no, I turned that in. I know I should be on the board. But it is amazing what Alicia Nye has created with our football team. We also post not only this on the board at the stadium, but we also post it on our Facebook football page by my wife. The comments were amazing. Nothing but positive feedback by parents of how proud they were of their sons or grandkids. It was amazing. Nye also created a academic weapon student athlete of the week per grade level. Tom Price was generous enough to donate T-shirts to our football players who won each week. I will also state that we do have study tables on Tuesdays. Mr. Price is one that is involved with Alicia Nye and we believe this has been successful. How do we create who's on study table? Miss Nye will pull the grades every Monday, identify those who will benefit being in study table. The athletes who are missing homework or work in general, or who needs help, will attend the study table. Athletes who are requested by their parents who contact Miss Nye will report to these study tables. When do they occur? 3 o'clock on Tuesdays. Well, that's when practice is. Not for them. If we want to be student athletes, we have to take being a student more importantly than being an athlete. So those individuals will be able to go out and practice once their work is turned in. So that's how much expectations we have put on our kids in the football program. We're not done with Alicia and I. In the off season, as football is done, what does she do? She does more. She continues to check grades. She tracks kids down. She still stays on these kids, and she makes sure that they're doing the right thing. She also still has study table once a week with the athletes. She works to help seniors fill out NCAA clearinghouse applications because our dream is to go to college. She helps student athletes fill out scholarship applications and college applications in order to go to college. My view of what Alicia and I does is amazing, and it's a success. The expectations are very simple for our program. My question is, why can't we create the best student athletes in all our sports? Why can't we develop something like this year-round for our student athletes? I believe in order to benefit all sports besides football, we need to take a look at having an athletic academic advisor. Someone who's willing to put in the time, Alicia and I can. Someone who's willing to sacrifice any time, any effort, and a lot of pride and expectations, Alicia and I can do that. I think, as an overall view, our success as a football team isn't measured just by being football, but we take pride in being a little giant. We should be proactive and prepare these student athletes for the future, whatever it may hold. College is not for everybody, but at least they would know expectations and demands to be successful. We should offer study table, and I have suggested first period of the day would be an excellent time to offer study table for all student athletes, male and female. We should make a change for the betterment of Fremont athletics, for the betterment of the school district. In my mind, this could only help our school district and the report card. Kids are demanding, they want a lot. Well, we as a school district, we want a lot too, and success comes with education first. It's time to change, and if I know anything about Fremont School District, they are always willing and ready to do what's best for students. I appreciate you guys for allowing me to speak and speak on behalf of the academic weapons. Thank you. Any questions?
I'm like, don't go anywhere. I'm like, where
I
you
kind of
going?
walked away. Sorry.
We're not done with you.
We just get to talk now. Ask you questions and stuff. So, any questions for Coach Long?
I just have a couple comments. One of the things that I love so much about educators is that natural instinct to elevate, to lift up, to raise up. And you're first and foremost a teacher. Just as they're first and foremost students, as a coach, you're first and foremost a teacher. And I think you demonstrated that in multiple ways here. You first reached out to elevate Miss Nye. And in doing that, it naturally brought the elevation of others around her with what she could do. We know this is proven in education. If you have a struggling student in the classroom, you lift them up, the students around them automatically rise with them. And I think that's such good proof. Just appreciate it greatly. And this will be one of the videos that I think that we can all very proudly refer people to, because they don't know. This is so unique. They don't know, and what a blessing it is for the students. So thank you for helping to create that, and certainly to Ms. Nye.
Yep, thank you.
I just think that it's important to note that Coach Long offered a quarter stipend that he could have used anything for. He could have gotten another coach. I'm not going to bore you guys to death with my lack of football knowledge, but I mean, he could have done anything to strengthen the athletic part of the student athlete. But the fact that you saw the vision to strengthen that student part is commendable, and we all appreciate that. I also heard a call to action. I heard a call to action to get an athletic academic advisor. You know, we pride ourselves on creating student athletes, creating a great environment for kids to learn and grow. We also pride ourselves on being the best as far as being a little giant is concerned. So I don't want this conversation to get lost about how we can take what's been done. The pilot project has already been done. I'm sure we can have all kinds of data and statistics and things of that nature, but it sounds like the pilot's already been done. So again, this was a call to action that I don't want to get lost.
Well, I got to say, for me, going in on Tuesday, so I heard, and I know Chad and Alicia from outside of school too, so I heard about what they did on Tuesdays, and I'm like, all right. I said to Chad probably in the spring of this year, I said, hey, I want to help Alicia out if she needs help on study table every Tuesday night. When he said that the kids were excited about it, that's an understatement. I mean, we're down there at the stadium in the locker room. These kids are fighting over who's going to tape the paper that has the academic warriors on it. They're fighting over who gets to post it. And so they all get to see it. They're all excited about it. There's kids at study table every Tuesday. So Alicia and I she did all the work. It truly is amazing to see, and I know that teachers in general are like this, but what she has at her fingertips for those kids. I mean, a kid would be there for study table and, all right, so what did this teacher need? Well, I'm not sure. Let me text them real quick. I mean, she's on it. She knew every little lesson plan that needed to be done. I mean, if there was any, she could have probably walked around that locker room and told you what every kid was doing in school and the projects that they needed to turn in or how they did well on some or whatever. It was pretty amazing. It's a well-oiled machine, actually. And it did really well. And the one thing that I did notice from it, and I know that they're teammates, and playing sports when I was in high school, you know, sometimes you might not know, if I'm a senior, I might not know that freshman kid very well or whatever. But I'm going to call one of your players out. So one week, he just needed help on a project. So he happened to be at study table one week, and it was Jace Freimeyer. So he's in there, and Alicia's helping him with a project and stuff. And there was another player in there. He was having trouble with geometry. So Alicia and I look at each other when he said geometry. We're like, man, that was a long time ago. we're gonna have our basic knowledge of geometry, and beyond that, man, it was a long time, decades for me for geometry. So we got him through a few of the questions, helping him a little bit. And all of a sudden, Alicia was like, hey, Jace, didn't you have geometry last year? And he's like, yeah. And so she said, show him the questions that was on his Chromebook and stuff. And so Jace saw it. And so as another student, another kid, instead of a teacher or an adult, he just told him, well, look at it this way. And the kid was like, oh, okay. And so then all of a sudden, Jace became a tutor, even though he was in there for another project. So I think as teammates, all of a sudden that could make that community a little tighter, even where, hey, I made Academic Warrior. I'm willing to help out these kids too if I know one of my teammates is struggling a little bit. So shout out to Jace for doing that. And he didn't even know he was doing it. He was just answering a question. But then when the kid needed a question answered or needed some help, he just asked Jace, and it wasn't us because he knew Alicia and I were no help at all at that point anyway. But it was a privilege to go in there, wanted to meet the kids, and Chantel, to what you said, you know, those kids at study table, they were struggling with something, whether it was grades in general or just a project or whatever. But all of a sudden to have more one-on-one time with somebody who's just willing to sit down and talk to them about it and trying to help them through, you know, they're at practice 2-3 hours a night every night, and then games and everything else. By the time they get home, I mean, you know, they want to eat and then they still have homework to do. Well, they don't, you know, and they want to see their families and all that kind of stuff. So it does take a lot of time. So it was just fun. I loved it. So I can't say enough about it.
It's funny how a lot of the players call Miss Nye our football mom, you know, and she does care deeply about these kids as well as all the coaches. And you know, it's amazing what she has accomplished in 2 years.
And that's the other thing. It's rubbing off on the coaching staff because we're right in the hospitality room, right next to the locker room. So coaches are going in and out, and because they have practice right there at the field. And I don't know how many of them would walk through. They'd see who's in study table, and their response is always, "Yep, grades first. You can come out to practice after you get those grades up." You know, so it's just creating that mentality for everybody. Everybody's on board with it, so that helps immensely, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's definitely more than wins and losses in regards to the big picture.
So again, just to reinforce this whole call to action situation, I have the privilege of talking to Coach Long just about every day. And the call to action is to, you know, expand this through all athletics. The football team has done a great job with like I said, the pilot project. But why can't all of our student athletes benefit from this type of assistance? And I think they should be able to.
I agree. I think it should be a whole sport thing. All of kids should be able to get the grades and keep them up.
Statistically speaking, about half of the students that are at the high school are student athletes. And it could raise our district report card.
Yep.
You know, it could only help our kids achieve goals of going to college if they choose to go to college. But it's also given more expectations from Fremont schools. And this is saying be a student first and an athlete second.
Mm-hmm.
But also helps too, so that way they don't fall behind, because if they get behind, then they might not graduate or they might not make it to the next grade. And this keeps them up on that. You don't want them, or they can't be eligible next year.
Correct.
Or the next sport. I mean, we have a
Yep,
lot of
or the next
2
sport.
and 3 sport athletes.
Yep.
So
The one problem I can say that we are finding with our student athletes who are in football is once football is done, what do we have to hold over their heads to keep them accountable? And by moving to make this change, if possible, we have a lot to hold over their heads, and we have a lot of resources to help them. And that's one thing I can say at Fremont. We have resources, and we have good people who are all willing to help. And I think that's something we need to look at in the future for our student athletes.
Coach, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I don't mean stop. I say thank you. I describe, whenever I talk about Coach Long to anybody, I say he is a player's coach. And what I mean by that is, those are his young men. You know, he really cares for them, loves them deeply, and it shows. And I'm just proud to have you as our staff and our football coach. And I tell everybody I can what a player's coach you are and how appreciative we are of that. And if I'm hearing everybody right, you would like to hear a proposal on how to make this happen.
amen.
I think I'm the person to do that, so we'll get on that. And Coach, we'll expect a call, or at least in conversations, and we'll see, working with the high school administrative team, just what we can do going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Coach.
it.
Thank you.
Okay. May
All
I a couple other things real quick?
Yep.
I'd like to report back to the board. Last meeting, Mr. Durbus came. Remember, he talked about the safe walk to school for his child, right, from White Road. So just so you know, and I did call Mr. Durbus and we got it all squared away, but I want to let the board know kind of where we are and officially let the community know what we decided. Mr. Amway and I met with the city engineers that first week, and they have a lot of tools looking at, satellite views of all the streets in town. And we actually kind of created a pathway from that neighborhood and tried to find, okay, what is safe or unsafe? Where's the railroad tracks? Where's the crosswalks? Where the sidewalks stop and where do they not? With our teamwork with the city, we really came to the conclusion there wasn't a great way without significant dollars creating crosswalks and safe routes over the railroad track there behind, by the bank right there on Brush Street. So I went back to my transportation folks and said, okay, what can we do with maybe some surrounding routes? So we were able to find 2 routes that are in that proximity that aren't full. So we believe we can absorb that neighborhood. We did a search and we think there's about 40 eligible riders in that neighborhood. If the trends hold true, about half of the eligible riders actually ride. So, we have about, 3,600 students, and about half of them ride a bus. And that's pretty true almost all over town. So we believe there's about 20 students in that neighborhood, and we think we can find a way on those 2 routes to get those 20 students on. One thing that was a concern from the very start was if we declare State Street unsafe to cross, then I've got a whole lot of other neighborhoods, as you imagine, going east from that neighborhood. There's quite a few kids that walk that are still on the other side of State Street. But as we looked at those crosswalks, as you get farther down, like by Kentucky Fried Chicken, Wilson Avenue, there is a crosswalk there where there's not one to the west at the bank. And as you go farther towards downtown, the crosswalks are more marked. It's better lit. It's just a better situation. So Mr. Am and I believe that we can distinguish this neighborhood as unsafe enough to justify this busing route. Then also maybe with a clear conscience, and it's not always easy, but to tell those other families, we believe those neighborhoods still have a safer way to get there. And if State Street is the issue, there's a way over. So just want to let you know that is the plan. We want to get a letter out before the 1st of December, so hopefully next week, get a letter to all those families in that neighborhood, find out how many are interested, and then hopefully after Christmas break, be able to start that new route with a stop in that neighborhood or 2, depending on how many of the respondents we get. So that's the plan going forward. Mr. Durbus was very thankful for my willingness and our willingness to look at that, and I think we've got a good solution. So anybody have any questions on that?
So you are going to put the routes in place based on the safety findings, not
Correct.
on the results of the survey, right? So even if only 2 families,
Correct.
it's still going to
Yeah.
be available.
I think that neighborhood, we believe, should be bused. We'll figure it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, if it's 40, it's 40. We'll figure it out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it may be me driving it, but we'll figure it out. And that, I hate to say it somewhat in jest, but that's an issue. It isn't like I may have a bus, but I don't have a driver. I mean, so that's another factor in all of this is just how much we want to do and how much we can do they aren't the same thing, unfortunately, sometimes. So, okay, anything else on that?
Thank you for
Yeah.
your due diligence
Absolutely.
in the matter.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I'm glad we came to a good plan. So. Okay, let's continue. If I, Mr. Price, that's all I had tonight for my report.
Yep.
Facilities and operations, we have some donations. I like to read them off just because they're worthy. American Legion Post 608 donated a very large American flag for the pack. It's going to be on one of the curtain rods that will actually drop so they can pull it down and bring it up. And it was actually Henry Gregorski's idea. He said, hey, I'd like to get a big flag. And I said, I know someone who would love to support us with a flag. So I called Ken Dumminger and said, Mr. Dumminger, how about a flag? He said, I'm on it, and there it is. So I'm not sure it's up yet, but the flag is on its way. Ken and Robbie Armbruster, 3 bags of candy for the Ross PBIS. And remember, that's our positive behavior interventions system that we're using at Ross, actually in all of our buildings, but it's really taken off at Ross. John and Linda Cahill for passes and T-shirts, always generous. Faith Lutheran Church, Not the first time we've had stuff from them, so we appreciate that. City of Fremont, Gatorade and cash for $39, PBIS. Kiwanis Club, some hot chocolate. Really felt good today, I'm sure. Steve and Cheryl Kneeling for some toiletries for the middle school. The Rotary Club for 60 books. This is a neat thing that the Rotary does, just quickly so you understand. Every time they have a guest speaker, instead of giving that speaker a coffee mug or a Rotary pen or something, they hand them a book and have them sign it, and then we give that book to our schools. And it's really gone over well, even with our guest speakers, because they don't need another cup or mug or pen with Rotary on it, right? Something that they can sign, personalize, and give back to schools. So those 60 books represent 60 guest speakers over the last couple of years that Rotary has had in as guest speakers. So, and then VFW Post for socks. And that's one of those things that, you know, it's not glamorous to give socks, but we need socks. You know, backpacks we get, pencils we get, paper we get, socks we need. So we're always grateful for that. So thank you.
Before I call for the motion to approve that, did we skip over Denise?
It's work session.
Oh, am I in trouble? Mrs. Hurt. Okay. Yes, let's approve this.
So let's,
and then we'll
okay.
continue with Mrs.
Yep.
Hurt.
Okay, so can I get a motion to approve item 1, please?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Espiritu. Could I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Laird. Any discussion?
It's going to be a very quiet day in the office tomorrow, just for the sake. I'm in trouble.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Spiritu,
Yes.
Ms. Laird,
Yes.
Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes, motion's approved. So now we'll go back in the agenda.
Let's do that.
Okay.
Mrs. Hurd, I apologize. You're my favorite ever.
No worries whatsoever.
He got excited talking about being a bus driver.
I did. That's what it is.
All right. Well, good evening. Welcome to your work session. Mr. Price, board members, Mr. Detweiler, Ms. Parkhurst, thank you for giving me some time this evening. During this work session this evening, we are going to highlight a few policies, your board policies that have to do with our federal programs, federal dollars, and how some of those components fit into our district and what that looks like in a very real, practical sense. I tried to really work this all the way down. Joining me this evening is Bonita Arguelles, who is in our audience. She runs point on our Title I program and our EL program in our district. So her work is very, very important to many of the pieces that you're going to see. I chose just 4 policies to highlight with you. The first one, DECA, the administration of those federal grant funds, and those are all in a packet at your seat for you. IGBJ, which is oversees our Title I programs. IGBL, which is our parent and family involvement in education, and IGBI, which is a program specific for our English learners. Right. So the first policy, DECA, takes a look for us at those consolidated, it's the governance that overrides all of our federal programs. The majority of time when you hear federal programs and you hear dollars assigned to it, it many times gets associated to one of those title federal grants. Title I is our largest federal grant as far as dollars, but all of those title grants all the way down to IDEA, early childhood special education, are all flow into what we call our consolidated federal grant. And that is to the tune of $2.7 million that comes into our district. That can go anywhere from a little over 3 million down just a little bit to 2.5. And it really, every year is based on a per pupil, and we see slight fluctuation. Ms. Parkhurst and I worked very closely every year to make sure that we have a plan for each one of those grants, and then we budget those dollars according to that plan. So the narrative section that comes out of my department and the financial section that comes out of the Treasurer's Department work very closely hand in hand. So you can take a look at those components. Title 1A, you're probably most familiar with. This is our programming. In Fremont, we have a literacy focus. Some districts will utilize those funds a little bit more with math. We primarily use those funds at our elementary buildings, and I'm going to talk a little bit more as we keep going. Our Title I delinquent grant is what provides us with our instructors, our teachers that we are able to place at our Juvenile Justice Center here in Fremont. So it's with those grant dollars that the district helps support the instruction to all of our students that find their way there. Title IIA, supporting effective instruction, is dollars that we use towards professional development for staff. Title 4A is a support and academic enrichment. This gets a little comprehensive. There's a lot of different pieces that are allowable within that, but it truly needs to be any kind of enrichment or extra that would support our students. Very similar with the rural and low income. And then the IDEA, those two very much align to special education. So within all of those grants, there are definite guidelines, do's and don'ts that we can't adjust. Our Educator Rising is a middle school program that we have here where we have the opportunity to entice our student population to become an educator someday. And that's a nice grant that offers us some additional pieces here at the middle school. Our early childhood education, that facilitates us with our ESC. And that child nutrition is that last federal program grant that varies very much on a regular basis, depending on the reimbursement and again with that per pupil amount. So that dollar amount changes annually, correct?
Yeah. I mean, it changes. It's based upon our reimbursements from our food purchases. So it can, and again, they also give other dollars in there too. So it does vary on a year-to-year basis.
It is this policy that guides us in the district with purchasing, with bidding process, with inventory. All of those federal guidelines comes into all of those components. We have to be very careful that we are augmenting our general fund, that we are not supplementing. We have to be very thoughtful in using those dollars appropriately. And it is that language and those guidance that you will hear about often that comes into DECA.
So if I may real quick.
Absolutely.
So do these funds then like run on a federal fiscal year then?
They do.
Okay.
We work very hard in the district to make sure that our entire grant process is submitted, completed by June 30th, which allows us a spend back date to July 1 with the fiscal year. We just were able to move to a full approval of this year's grant just a couple of weeks ago. So that's when our finance department can start drawing down those dollars and bringing them into the district, and we can start utilizing those. But we can go back to, if we make the June 30 deadline, we can go back to a July 1 start.
Thank you.
Denise, in the meantime, it's reimbursed for anything we would have spent in the meantime, is that
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Because we have salary dollars coming out of many of these grants. And so obviously we start paying those right at the start of the school year and those pieces. We use a lot of these summer, or some of these dollars as well in the summer with the programming that takes place too. So sometimes Megan is creative.
Yeah. Sometimes we have to like obviously front the money and then wait because it's on this like reimbursement program. You have to spend it. You can ask for advances, but it gets messy on our end. So we like to we spend the money and then we submit it and then they send us the money back.
All right, so moving on specifically to the Title I aspects. So all 4 of our elementary buildings are ran with a school-wide Title I program. We also have we have Title I programs that are targeted assistance in our non-public world. So within the Bishop Huffman Catholic School System, we have a Fremont City School staff member that services our Title I students at Sacred Heart Elementary. And new this year, up and running, very, very new. We have Fremont resident students at Solomon Lutheran in Woodville. And so we have students that will qualify for Title I assistance in that non-public facility. They are Fremont resident students, and dollars will follow with those students. So all of our elementaries here in Fremont all have Title I services in some capacity. One of the things that by law, and IGBL talks to us a little bit about that, is that we need to make sure that every year we have parents that come together. We review the procedures, the policy. We talk about the purpose of Title I. And that parent advisory council that comes together, each building does their own. They have then the opportunity to provide feedback to our Board of Education through that parent involvement policy. And so we review it, we go over it, we talk about items that maybe they would like to see or not see. So this year, I'm happy to report that they view no changes necessary, but they were very happy again to come together and to be part of that process. I think it's wonderful anytime that we get our parents and our community involved in the whole process, from the policy that brings us the guidance all the way down to them interacting in the building. So it's just a plus. One of the things that I would like to highlight for you, this is a site that Ms. Arguelles has put together, and this mimics the presentation that takes place in all of our buildings. This is located on our website, on the district website, under curriculum, under Title I. So if any of our families were unable to attend their Parent Advisory Council meeting at their own individual school and were looking for some of that information, they would be able to access this site. It's available in English and Spanish, so we always want to make sure that we're doing our best to assist our families. But as they got to the site, as they arrived here, they would have access to information about the program. And the page can be read to them. It details the types of programs. It details the funding. Where does that funding come from? How do we get this extra dollars at school? What do the services look like when my child is involved with that? If I'm a parent and I want to know more about being involved, what are my options? Who do I contact? Where do I go? All of our families are offered a compact, which allows them an agreement between the school and the home and the child. The teacher signs, the principal signs. So we try to bring all of those individuals together. Very similar to what Coach Long was saying, that we all come together to make sure that we're providing those best academic supports. He's talked about the high school level. Here's an example at the youngest level in our elementaries. Here's just some photos, some examples of one of those family involvement evenings. So we bring all of our families in together in our buildings. And then typically what happens is we divide those students out. So here you see a parents receiving information from one of our Title I teachers at Otis. And she's going through that presentation. She's giving all of that information at the very beginning of the school year. And here you see some of our kiddos involved because they come in as a family, and then we separate them so that we keep the children involved with an activity. Here's an event, the family event at Lutz Elementary. I just gave you the book there. It's usually theme-based so that we drag the kids in, they get excited about it, we give them a good hook, and in the meantime, our families and our parents are getting a lot of really quality information that they need to go forward with. IGBI talks a little bit more specifically about our EL programs. All of our students, we have an established identification process of how we identify our students that may have a need for some academic support based on English being a second language for them. We have academic and language supports built in within the district, and we also have many different outreach and family connections that address the need in all of our students P12. A big part of IGBI is also educating our staff and making them more knowledgeable so that we are accepting and honoring our students in the best capacity. The majority of our EL students come to us speaking Spanish, but we, as I think I've shared earlier this year, I believe we have approximately 10 languages in the district right now. So one of those supports, those academic and language supports, we have some devices that we utilize with our students academically. We also can utilize those devices to translate when we have families and parents involved, because we always are trying to make sure that it is that native language that our families are most comfortable in hearing that information. The information's too important to rely on that not being that communicable language with them. So another piece that Bonnie has put together, here's an example. This is available to all of our staff members. So as our students are identified as being an EL student, that identification, their scoring on their assessments, puts them at different levels throughout the spectrum, if you will, of usable levels. So what we've done, Bonnie has created this for our staff, which allows them to have some resources very readily available to them. So if they have a student that scores a 1 or a 2 and is deemed to be emerging, we give them some immediate strategies as to what's appropriate for that student. So this elevator is very, very user-friendly for our staff. Gives them some very specific strategies that are aligned. All the way through, my student is now advanced and is exiting the program. We're connecting to those EL standards for our educators. And I really, really love this last page, the 7th floor, because Bonnie does a really good job of varying these resources. So the resources will stay for a little while, and then she changes those out. So just really to try to get a lot of knowledge and a lot of availability out there. And then just to leave our community and our board with the information that truly, if there's a need or a concern, if there's a question with one of our federal grants, I am ready for those questions. And if there's anything for our Title I program, our EL program, between Bonnie and Anita, they do a fantastic job of meeting the needs of our families and our students within Fremont City Schools. I think I gave you the pamphlet, and you can just see that that's available at the district office, in our buildings, on our website, and then we provide that in more than one language just to make that accessible information. Thank you very much.
Denise, thank you so much. You can see that they're on it. They're just doing a fabulous job supporting our families and supporting our students with those needs. And that title world is not an easy thing to wade through. And I'm just so grateful. You know, they say a wise leader surrounds himself with people that are better than they are. And this is an example right there. And Bonnie, thank you for a fabulous job of what you do for our families. Yeah, thank you. Any questions for Denise on that?
Nope, just thank you all for the work that you do. Thank you.
It's amazing that we have, I just don't think about it, 10 languages in our district.
Right.
You just don't think of that as you walk around Fremont or
Yep.
whatever. It's just, but 10 languages, that was just kind of a shock to me, but
Yeah.
that's a lot of work.
Yep.
Yeah, they always say when you want to see what the community is made up of, go to the school.
Right.
You know,
That's
that's
it.
the children of all the households. Go to the school, and that tells you. And there again, this is about lifting up. You know, if you lift one up, the others around benefit as well, and that's really amazing. I think especially for our young children, learning the English language. I think so much is put on them as interpreters of the household. You know, and it's easy to forget that even though this very young child may know some English, they're trying to interpret adult language, not just a different language, but adult level vocabulary. And this bridges a huge gap. And I think that's incredibly impactful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank, all the staff for all the hard work putting this together and supporting our families. I mean, it's important that they're supported and that they know that we care, that it's important for them to understand and take advantage of the resources that we do have in the school. So I'd like to thank everyone for that.
Okay. Thank you again, Denise. All right. Moving on to our policies. I didn't forget anything else today. We okay. Just
Check real quick. No, you're
I
good.
appreciate you got your eye on me. All right. Next section, a significant list of policies. And I'm sure there's something here that Mo has some questions on. This is first reading. We can clarify anything that you'd like to look at. A lot of these are based on legislation and some changes, and some of the stuff you'll recognize as hot items in the press lately, like campaign, how we campaign as a school, and cash for sporting events, and some of the things that have been sort of in the news. But I bring then forward those policies this evening.
All right, so can I get a motion to approve items 2 through 31, please?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Laird. Could I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Bloom. Any discussion?
I have discussion on a lot of the policies. I know you guys aren't surprised, but I do.
That's the job. That's
Yep.
all right.
Yep.
That's the job. That's it.
So do you mind if we just start from like item 2 and just kind of go through? Like start with the policy that's listed on item 2?
Sounds good.
On item 2,
What's the policy letters? I got those. up.
BBFA.
Got it. Thank you.
Number 5 on page 2, it says board member from voting on a contract to employ a person as a teacher or instructor if he or she is related to that person as a father, mother, brother, or sister. Spouse was struck from that language, and I'm not sure why it would seem that a spouse should be included, and I'm not sure if
I think it's a great point. I can't imagine why you wouldn't include spouse in that. I know I've watched this board do the same thing, recuse yourself for those kinds of votes.
Right.
So
I'm
it's
not
been my experience that if you want to narrow a policy, that's always doable because the board's power is to do that, obviously, and I think that would be a good move.
I think the legal language changes from time to time of what constitutes that relationship. How close does it have to be? So I'm not sure that that's the case. We'd have to ask the policy
I
committee.
can certainly, how about I do a little homework on that
And
and see why spouse is struck?
I think it's always best, regardless of what ends up in policy, I think it is always best that members remember the perception that even if something may not be a legal conflict, will the community perceive it as one? If you're voting on something, someone you have a relationship of some kind with,
Right.
in my opinion, it is always best to abstain.
it is. I am definitely a fan of clear and concise rules, though. So if we just, even if if leaving spouse off fits the law and changes in the law, that's fine. But do we as a board then have the ability to say, and for our local rules, we would say this as well?
I think it's once again, I think if you're, I would be more worried about broadening a policy to include more and probably better. But I would say still anything that you talk about tonight, I could run past
Past Dean.
our attorney and just say, hey, here's this, is what's the history, and then why or why not. So I think that's certainly a conversation worth having, absolutely. So I will include that spouse conversation for sure. Anything else, Sarah? Yeah.
Well, not on that particular
Okay.
policy. On, and shout out to the policy committee for all the homework.
Yeah, you're welcome.
On, policy DJB,
Okay.
again, just in trying to streamline and make sure that we have clear and concise language. In that first paragraph, it says money may be drawn down from accounts by check. And it formerly it said can. May, the word may suggests that there's other options or alternatives. And if there are, great. If there's not, though, I don't know why more definitive language isn't stated.
Do you mean you want to know specifically what the other options are, like an ACH versus a paper check?
I don't necessarily know that it needs to be defined, but when you say money may be versus money can be, that just, it rings differently.
We'll check it out.
The same thing in the last, that last paragraph, says an individual with access to petty cash, and at the end of that, it says, like if somebody is not doing that appropriately, they may be held personally accountable for losses.
Instead of will be.
Yeah. Again, I just think that clear and concise language is,
I think we had to remember, though, too, policy has to have a little room for discretion.
it does.
Yeah.
So, like on the word may or can, both imply discretion. Is there a reason you'd prefer one or the other? Because I see them as interchangeable. You may do that, or you can do that. Can doesn't mean always.
Sure.
May doesn't
May
mean.
just sounds wishy-washy to me. May's like, yeah, we maybe we'll do that. And I guess it is, left to the interpretation of the reader. Like how you read and interpret information. This last sentence in particular, so if you're talking about somebody who might be in the wrong, you know what I mean, for doing something, and if you're talking about now disciplinary action with that person, and it says it may happen when you take action, then is there room for the clapback?
I think it comes down to like most disciplinary action. You may see a statement at the end. When we talk about progressive discipline statements,
Yes.
It can say something like,
Up to and including.
continued behavior of this matter may result in termination, further disciplinary action up to termination. It leaves room for the discretion that this is possible.
Certainly.
And I think that's because that specifically says may be held for pretty much restitution.
Personally liable.
Yeah, because it states just like termination is a specific result.
Correct.
So may result in that up to and including, but doesn't say always and forever will. I don't think that's saying there won't be discipline. I think that's saying there may be personal restitution to pay this back because it's stating a specific. I don't know that
I guess I just can't think of a situation where you would not. You know what I
personnel
mean?
gets complicated.
Sure.
It does. There are circumstances where you may or may not terminate someone. It may fall short of that specific disciplinary action. So I think this leaves room for administration to determine the discipline of staff. Without policy saying, if this, it will always and forever be this result.
No, and I agree with that there has to be room for discretion, but then maybe the last part of that sentence needs to be looked at. And again, maybe that's just something that Dane can look at just to make sure that if we had somebody in that situation, that we aren't, again, making it so narrow that we constrict our, ability to move or not.
I think part of what's maybe not specified there, and this is where, again, you want your policy to be broad and procedures precise. That's the difference between
Fair.
the two, is you could have someone that did something improper, but not necessarily inappropriate. So let's say they made a counting mistake. That's very different than someone that embezzled money
Yeah.
with intention.
Understood.
Yeah, so I think it's leaving room for that we could have a procedure infraction or we could have a crime, and not to put the result and the discipline of both in the same bucket, always defined.
Good talk. That made sense. Nope. That makes sense. I appreciate it.
I do also want to say that these policies, the wording choice does come down from our OSBA attorneys, that they are choosing a lot of these words to keep us within like legal bounds so that if something happens, we're not tied to one decision over another. So sometimes their wording is because an attorney said so. So whether or not that's correct, and we want to hold with those wordings, that is where it comes from.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that we can't put the local flavor on it.
Right.
We got to do
Yep.
that too.
Here we go. I don't have anything for item 4 or 5. Six is GBCC. Item 3 on there describes just not wearing political buttons or pins or T-shirts. And this is an overall policy about staff dress and grooming. So I didn't know why it was.
You said GBCC? I'm sorry. Okay.
So I didn't know why number 3 was just limited to that.
I don't have a 3 on my GBCC.
There are 3 bulleted items in the middle of the page.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm not seeing it. Well, go ahead. I'll make some notes here. What's,
This one is about staff dress and grooming.
right?
And it says that staff members will, and then the last one says refrain from wearing political buttons, pins, or T-shirts. This particular policy isn't just about like the next policy, GBG, is just specifically about political activities.
Right.
This one just seems to be a general policy about staff dress and grooming.
Right.
So I just didn't know why it was limited to political buttons.
There was an actual change in law that is directing this policy change.
Okay.
I think unfortunately, Sarah, this is my interpretation. I think our students in general have a little bit more freedom of expression than staff and administration. There is a big movement, in my opinion, politically about what kind of influence teachers and administrators can have on students politically. So I think that language came out specifically directed to staff for that reason, because the legislation is more about, kids can be kids and express themselves, but adults, you have influence. So Am I on track with that?
Absolutely.
John?
Yes, you are.
Yep.
That specific wording showed up in multiple policies, and we had to change multiple policies to make sure we were following law. And because they wanted that language added in, those policies had to be adjusted.
So that in that arena, the kids are going to get to do a little bit more.
Sure.
Teacher.
I just didn't know if it should include anything beyond that.
My guess is there's probably something in the employee handbook about
Yes.
Professional
Yes.
dress.
I looked there as well, and I feel like I'm like, in the butt right now. But I asked,
It's important for you to understand.
yeah, I
That's
asked.
okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I asked Gina for the employee handbook
Handbook,
as well,
right.
and I did not see anything that was more specific
Okay.
about like just making sure.
I'm guessing maybe the handbook lags
Maybe.
in being updated. I think policy gets passed.
Sure.
Procedures then
That
get
wouldn't be,
adjusted
yeah,
to
reflect the old
match.
language, but certainly something in there about professional dress. I can't imagine there's not.
It talks about being neat and well groomed and
Right.
but I guess if I'm talking about, political things too, I would also want to talk about like anything else that might not be in the best taste for an educator, to wear that something that doesn't have any derogatory language or anything of that nature. So is it possible to expand, I guess is the question.
Absolutely can.
Absolutely.
Sometimes as new law comes out, the law is specific. So your other things that you had previously are still intact. And the law will say, but there's one thing, you must be specific. You can be general over here, but now we want you to be specific here. And I know that doesn't always make sense. It really doesn't. In the banking world, for example, there's this thing called NACHA rules. There's like 300 of them. Federal Reserve now says, yeah, but these two, we want to make sure that you really bold them and you really remind and so on, even though those other 300 are still intact. And it just kind of comes in flow, with what's going on with risk, political movement, those sorts of things, where something will get highlighted above something else.
Okay.
So I'm going to check that just to make sure we have a clear picture of the expectations for adult dress, right? Okay,
Because we have the same expectation for our kids,
absolutely.
for our students. So I would just think that would be something that we would want to, not to take away from what is there, but maybe to just
Clarify.
give a little bit more expansion to what is there because it's required by new policy or what have you.
Okay,
Just as long as we don't, if there's a freedom the students have that teachers don't, we cannot make our policy more restrictive in that way.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Got it.
Yep. I think I need a whole tutorial on the third grade reading guarantee. I
get
did
in line,
some,
girl.
I did some
I think there's people at the state
I gotta
house
say,
right now for that, right?
Ask every
Oh,
third grade
boy.
teacher and
I pulled up what was on the ODEW website today and was trying to, and I think I was still just a tiny bit confused. But speaking of ODEW, on policy IGBEA-R, and there was another one as well. While we're changing things, should we change that to Ohio Department of Education and Workforce?
that struck me too, Sarah, as its references to ODE may not be appropriate anymore. I think we'll be hearing that probably, and they'll probably go through all of our policies and make recommendations, just like they changed homeschooling to home education. That's the new term. If you notice, it's a lot of home education now instead of homeschooling. I think we'll get the same probably in our next round from OSBA that will change all those things appropriately.
So that's not something that you would
I would
change
say,
now
let's wait, because we'll miss one. I mean, that's the only thing I'm thinking is,
Well, sure.
there's probably 100 of them in there somewhere, and I think if we kind of wait for the updates, we'll probably get an official list of where they are.
There's been a little bit of even though things passed at the House, there's been still a little bit of back and
pushback.
forth
Yeah.
about
Right.
clarification of those changes.
There's a
So
pending lawsuit. I mean, it's a mess, so
Until it's official.
maybe that's a wise too.
I mean, and I'm sure come February, if it is official after the first of the year, come February, they'll say, okay, here's the policies that all have to be
Right.
changed. And it'll probably be a bigger list than this, just because of the
Right.
verbiage.
The numbers,
Yeah.
On policy IIA,
17.
on page 1, in that first paragraph, the last sentence that was added, it said, in selecting instructional materials, the district complies with all state and law requirements. I'm going to assume that that's something that we're required to put in.
Yep.
But we do have CQCC, so I didn't know if that needs to be described in this policy or if it is somewhere else in the policies.
I think, or I would guess, Ms. Lewis, that our procedure matches state law, so that as we do our thing, it fills up or follows those guidelines. Not something we can certainly check on, but that's my guess. Denise, would you concur on that?
And that was a specific change that came out of the budget bill out of House Bill 33, where DEW is going to start mandating those primary instructional resources. We are anticipating to see that in the 24-25 school year. So I think that change in law is what it just aligned that for that. You are correct. We have very strong process within our district to review. And I don't think that's our regulation, our guideline, that's our process at the local level. I don't anticipate that to change. What will change for us is the language that you just read in the law, where we will be prescribed to choose from the approved materials
yeah.
that they give us.
Okay. I think the last thing I have, and it just kind of, that's not gonna be true. When I read the policy about home education, that we've changed from saying homeschooling to
Right.
home education. That is very different than the chartered non-public schools. But so when we're like in JEA, when we're talking about compulsory attendance ages, I didn't know if like somebody being exempt from compulsory attendance, if they're attending a chartered school, does that need to be included in here as well?
I think it says requirements of state law. So an educational program meeting or the requirements of state law covers some of those things. So like that's us, that's chartered public schools, that's probably a parochial school. I mean, so that falls in under state law, so it's probably checks the box.
Okay.
Because there'd be several, I mean, obviously more options than there's ever been before. So I think that would be one of those.
Okay. So I think this is my last one.
with that, if I may, is there one other thing that's very common in policy writing? You want the policy written to always match the law, but in a way that if one tiny piece of the law changes, you don't have to rewrite your entire policy. If they take charter schools out all of a sudden, then you're not rewriting policy to change one word.
Right.
It just references state law.
And I was saying that charter schools aren't included in some of these things.
Yeah, I know, and
Okay,
I'm
so
saying
you're just saying the same thing.
yes, that since
backwards.
charter schools are mentioned in the law, the fact that you've said you're going to follow the law is sufficient. You don't
Right.
have to identify what's
Okay.
in the law.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I'm going to assume then, and then I will knock it off with the policies. JECBC
Okay.
on not number 3, the 2 paragraphs that are under item number 3. It does differentiate between non-chartered public schools and then home education. But in the last sentence of each of those paragraphs, it says superintendent or determined by the superintendent and must fulfill the same academic, non-academic, and financial requirements. But the home education students, there's not the academic requirement. And I didn't,
I'm going to guess that
is that something that's maybe?
we've been talking
in
about
the-
this a lot. They have taken the reins off of home education so much that they don't, in the old days, they had to have a teacher that they were actually assigned to that would sign off on the work done at home. That's gone. Right now, I used to be able to ask for information about what they're going to be studying, their curriculum, all that. That's all gone too. I get a note from a parent on the back of a napkin saying he's going to be homeschooled. It's basically over. So I have a feeling that they took out academic in a very real sense, that if that child is pulled out for homeschooling, the academics, I used to have some, I almost pretend authority, but a little bit of authority that they're actually doing something in their home education program, but that's gone. I have no say.
But this is talking, and I hear you.
Yeah.
This is talking about extracurricular activities. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
the non-chartered public school students, according to this policy, are required to fulfill the same academic, non-academic, and financial requirements as any other participant. But if you look at the next paragraph and it's talking about homeschool, that academic piece was removed.
Suppose that's an eligibility issue there. So I can't claim a home educated child as academically ineligible. Suppose? I'm asking.
That would make sense.
Answering a question with a question.
That's right. That's my strategy right there.
But that would make sense. If you have no say in the matter of what they're being taught,
How do I know they're passing?
right,
Yeah.
then, I mean, basically, if they can write it on a napkin that they're going to be home educated, then they can write it on a napkin that says Johnny has all A's.
Right.
And there's nothing you can say about it. I mean, really, it's like you said, it's taking all sense of guidelines off
Yeah.
for home education.
That would seem to be at least a rational explanation. I
That's a
certainly
big,
check
broad
on that.
stroke.
But the fact they're pulling academic off for the home educated child means there's no eligibility. That's my guess.
Shout out to the football team for
Right.
making,
There's no Mrs. Nye involved here. That's what we're saying, man.
Have fun if you have a home educated student try out for football, because we won't know what their academics are.
tell Miss Nye, level up.
That's right.
That's all. Thank you guys for allowing me to indulge and go through.
Sure, I'll look
you're-
into those, and on second reading, I'll have some feedback. How's that?
Perfect.
You're right on the money. Reviewing policy is one of the key things that's stated right in the law, is the responsibility of board members. So go through them with a fine tooth comb. There will be things that policy committees miss, and that's important.
Keeps us all sharp. Absolutely.
All right, any other questions or discussion on those items? All right, if not, roll call, please.
Ms. Laird,
Yes.
Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Mrs. Speartube,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes, motion's approved.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on, we're on item 32, resignations. This is the first one, is where we have the edit, that December 4th. If we could change that to December 18th. Tracy is graciously enough going to stay on for a transition period. So with your permission on that. Samantha Griffin, Allison Salisbury, November 9th. Moving on, the next page, resignation. Jason Smith is our head soccer coach. We're grateful for Jason for stepping up and doing that. We're very grateful for that. Item 33 is where we have our walk-on. So if I could start off with that first for item 33, appointments as certified staff substitutes. We have Mackenzie Halsey, Marky Harris, who's patiently sat out there in this during this very long meeting. She's on the right end, right there she is. She's came to hear that, and she just heard it. I'm going to say it again. Marky Harris, that a girl, and Devin Pollock. So those are our walk-ons for this evening, and we are so glad to have our substitutes. Maybe you saw my weekly email. We had 16 uncovered positions on Friday, so it's just very difficult to maintain quality programming with that short of a staff. So we're so grateful for our subs. Back on the regular agenda then, certified staff substitute Nancy Sloma, cook Michelle Carey, and then another list of certified staff substitutes, starting with Mary Brown and ending with Amy Sisler. Moving on to item 34, we have a few more supplemental contracts. Yes, we're talking spring sports already. Hard to imagine. Time does fly. But that gives us our coaches getting fired up for spring. Item 35, supplemental duty positions. You see those listed at the top of page 8, starting with Matthew Culbertson and ending with Pride Yost. Item 36, are status changes, and we have 3 of those this evening based on continuing education. Those are our
Right.
personnel items for this evening.
Can I get a motion to approve items 32 through 36, please?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Lewis. Could I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Laird. Any discussion? Ms. Harris, thank you for being a substitute. We need it. Thank you for sticking through Sarah's rampage. through the process.
Diligence is what, yeah.
Diligence. All right, roll call, please.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Ms. Laird,
Yes.
Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiritu,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes, motion's approved.
Thank you very much.
All right,
And
if I
on
can
to
turn
the
the
next.
page here. Moving on to report of the treasurer.
Good evening. I'm sure you're also excited to talk about numbers now.
I am.
I know. I'm actually excited about it too. This was the first, I mean, we've had good forecasts in the past, but this one I was very happy with when I could take a deep breath of air and be like, we're not going to be out of money by year 5. Now, obviously, our revenues are very unpredictable, to say the least. So this is just a best guess, but it was nice to be able to look at it and not go, what are we going to do to make payroll next year? So I do have 2 items tonight for approval. I have the October financial report. I'm not going to spend too much time on that just because it is reflected in the forecast. Ending of the month, we had higher revenues than we had expenditures, so that's always a positive thing to note. There were a couple expenses in there that I did want to point out that are driving up some of our supply costs, and they are actually going to be reimbursed through grants, but we run them through the general fund. So I just wanted to kind of point those 2 things out, that they're driving up expenses, but we will be receiving some at least partially matching, if not full matching dollars. So moving on to the 5-year forecast. Our revenues, we have been very lucky in the adoption of the Fair School Funding Plan. It has been very, it's done very good things for our district. If you remember 2 years ago, I was sitting here sweating bullets and not quite sure where the money was going to come from. And it is just the fact that it looks like with the budget, they're recognizing districts that have children in poverty and taking that into consideration. We really think that's where a lot of that additional money that's come to our district has been driven from, is those numbers. But
Isn't it great when once in a while government gets it
I
right?
know.
Once in a while.
So right, Chantel.
The math adds up.
Yeah, that is one of the things I can say. They are taking this into consideration, and it is very good for us.
The spirit of that Fair School Funding Act was, let's decide what does it cost in Ohio to teach a kid, right? here's the amount, whatever that is. Now let's talk about all the barriers that kids have, special ed and socioeconomic issues and minority and just whatever else issues block a kid from being successful. That costs money to support those children. So add on to that. So I think it finally makes a little sense. Now I'm just praying that the legislation will continue
Yeah.
to fund it fully.
Right.
But yeah, I just really wanted to highlight that ODE funding. That's just such a huge driver of this forecast. So we're hoping that's going to continue. But like I said, our revenue is very dependent on the whim of the government. So if that happens to change, this forecast could look very different in a very quick turnaround. I'm also happy that we're projecting that we'll have some higher true days of cash than we've been able to have in the last couple of years. Again, I'm not sweating bullets at the last minute making transfers from accounts to try to get payroll. We can just look kind of at the month and it's good to go. We're also being able to utilize some interest revenue, which again, can't count on that forever, but we're gonna keep that while we can. You will see in a couple of years, we do hit deficit spending, and that's as our salary and benefits get closer to that 80% of our expenses, which we're, as Mr. Detweiler so says, we're in the business of people, so that is going to be our higher. But as you reach that 80% and tip towards it, you are going to reach deficit spending. But it is still nice that we'll have a cash balance at the end. So I kept really conservative on building into the forecast on these different revenues. Like I said, it's really hard to predict what the state's going to do a couple of years out with funding. So I did keep that pretty similar. I didn't hike that up real high in the projections. And we just kind of have to go with trends on some of those taxes that come in and that kind of thing. Is there any questions on the revenues?
I have just a few revenues. Okay,
Yes.
I get expense.
Yeah,
I get
okay.
expense questions. Never mind. Go ahead.
I have a revenue question. So any word or change on the pipeline?
Oh, yeah.
gonna ask that too.
The Supreme Court is now going to potentially make a decision in the next couple months.
Is that like next couple months for real, or like we'll get you in the next couple months?
How long have we been at this?
Oh, year and a half?
My whole time on the board, this was
Yeah.
But
But it's
So-
never been to the Supreme Court, though. So at least we're finally,
Right direction.
yeah. I mean, it's
I can tell you that it's getting some traction
Yes.
because the private business sector is stepping into.
Are
If
they?
you think about this, schools that had construction projects dependent
Oh, yeah.
on revenue that was dependent on that are now
Yeah.
halted.
Yeah.
So that industry is impacted as well. So I think some more voices have been put into this.
And those things we have heard, they are very hopeful that it's going to, that they're not going to drop underneath what they're currently valued
hope
at.
not.
Yeah.
Oy.
They had been under, just kind of a little background, they had been underpaying us what it was valued at. And then ODE, or not ODE, Ohio Department of Taxation came in and said, okay, your value's 60% of what was actually determined. And they started paying at that 60% at that time, probably about a year and a half ago. So hopefully it's seeming to lean towards that we will be getting back payments and not that we will have to be paying anyone back for that, those dollars that have been paid in.
I would think compared to like the AMP project that we had before, AMP affected just a few districts.
Yeah.
Where the pipeline,
is the state
you
of
have a lot
Ohio.
of districts. So if the state were to come back and say, oh, that value, yeah, you've been overpaying, so all these districts have to pay you back some money, that would not go over too well.
Class action
No.
suit kind of way.
Yeah.
Right. Along with private industry saying, wait, now these school districts have to pay money back and we're in the middle of this building. I mean, that's a huge effect on things if they were to determine that.
Yeah.
So your budgeting is based on the 30% they had been paying or the 60 some that it was increased to?
The 60 the state, I think it was like 50 or 60% that the state had came back after their initial BTA filing, that they came in and said, okay, it's actually at this percent now. And that's what they've been paying at. And that is what my forecast is based on. Yes. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Expenses. Of course, our salary and benefits are huge factors in the expense world. And we did have to project those benefits growing, not solely just based on, because some of them are attached to salaries, like the retirements, but also the cost of insurance is going up. Everybody sees it. We are not immune from it. We do have a self-funded account for our medical and dental insurance, so we do keep that very much so in-house and try to promote healthy activities for all of our employees. But we also had to look at what's happening out in the medical industry, and I don't see rates dropping anytime soon. So we do have that projected to have a pretty steady increase every year. Purchase services, you're going to see increases for all of these. The district, again, is not immune from inflation. We've seen it in all of our purchases. I'm sure everyone's seen it at home in their grocery bill. We have to account for that as well. So there's some steady increases in all of our expenses. And we've also been seeing higher, our real estate collection, like administration costs have been going up as well. So we also accounted for increases in there too. And I also just wanted to highlight the fact that we are moving off of ESSER funds. Those are going to have to be used up by the end of this June of 24. Thank you, Denise. That's that partnership of federal grants. So we did like anything that we used to be able to go, oh, well, we can use our ESSER funds. That's going away at the end of this year. So you will see that where there's increases from some of these expense lines, it's due to that movement away from the reliance on those ESSER funds. We also have multiple meetings during the year trying to make sure that our PI funds are utilized to keep some of those higher purchases out of the, general fund. And we also have been able to utilize those funds for the building maintenance contracts for the new buildings. We have a fund specifically set aside for those costs that we're utilizing as well to try to keep those out of the general fund too. So is there any other questions?
I have just a few. On the expense end, when we take a look at the increase in salary and wages and the benefit cost, makes perfect sense. Do we have a system that helps you track FTE among staff to student enrollment and upcoming retirement anticipation? So, you know, if enrollment drops, are you able to adjust FTE with attrition?
We constantly have conversations about that. I know last year when Mrs. King looks at what positions she's hiring for, we make sure we get reports monthly from our EMIS coordinator, Mandy Miller, as to what those enrollments are. So we do keep on top of that to make sure, are we filling a position next year that needs to be filled? Because we are seeing an increase in retirements. We had some change in STRS language, and that is always a topic of discussion every time, is that are we staffed equivalently to how many students we have.
Maybe on the practical side, if I may, Ms. Laird, Mrs. King, every spring, as we start planning for the next year, starts to look at class sizes in each building, K-5, and say, okay, we may just need 2 sections instead of 3 sections of 3rd grade over at Lutz, for example. And that's where we often are able to look at class sizes. And so if we have a retirement K-5, we can say, okay, I don't need this 3rd grade over at Otis. I'm going to move them over to Lutz where I need them. So that's maybe a real practical way to, that we sort of match FTEs to staffing. Easier K-5, obviously, than it is 6 through 12. But that's certainly something we keep an eye on.
On the purchase services, and I know that encompasses a lot of different expenses, is there any one expense in particular?
Our ESC contract?
Okay.
That is,
Is there a, I mean, how many competitive options are there?
Well, there are other ESCs, and you can shop ESCs, and we do tend to look at that. I know Ms. Abernathy, who really does manage most of those folks, because incoming, there's speech pathologists, you know, it's often special ed mostly related, our special ed aides, our preschools. So Ms. Abernathy is kind of my point on that. She'll look at, okay, how much would it cost over here? How much does it cost over here? So she does keep an eye on that. I don't know if it's, lately we've done a thorough position by position comparison for salaries across ESCs. There's also always that conversation, whether we bring those in-house. Sometimes there's savings to be had by having it at the ESC versus our own, versus, you know, it's not our benefits, not our pay scale, not our, you know, sometimes we can save some money on that. But often it can tip too, you know, so if they've gotten raises at the ESC, now maybe it's better for us to bring them on, make them our employees, and save a little money on the total cost. So it is something we watch.
I think, you know, wherever you have a tip or an increase in one particular thing, I always like to assess and see, is it time to do a bid?
Yeah, sure.
You know, to get
Absolutely.
competitive bids and see what might be
Yeah.
available for you. And yeah, definitely check that internally too. One more item, and I guess this is on revenue, sorry. When will the OFCC release contingency dollars back into our operating?
that is at the completion of the project. They're currently they're releasing encumbrances
Okay.
of different companies that we've been working with. So I'd say probably the last couple of months, it's been every month we've had another entity that, oh, okay, hey, you guys can go ahead and close this purchase order out. We're done. And that does free up some of the encumbrances that are in those construction funds, because we are very fortunate. We came in under budget in a lot of different areas. So we are seeing that there was purchase orders that were money left over in them. So that is a very positive thing that we're seeing, but it won't be until the close of the project.
So are they giving you an estimated timeline on that?
Our last core team meeting, Ramsey was really rattling this cage. He's desperate to get this, Ramsey from OFCC is really wants this closed out. And I think it's the nature of the business. All of our contractors go on to the next job, and we're kind of old news. I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's just they've got other hot items on their plate. So sometimes the enthusiasm to getting closed out isn't what it should be. But Ramsey's certainly trying to change that. He did rattle some cages this last meeting. So we got to get this thing wrapped up. So there were a couple of things that got processed last week that he said, this is it, we're done. So wrap this up. So I think we're getting very close. I would say in single digits of months. So I think certainly by spring, we should be very, very close.
I was going to say
Wonderful,
that's what.
because, the partners that we worked with on that, Mosier, Gilbane, so many to mention, they worked so hard and they kept us under budget.
Absolutely.
On time, under budget, beautiful buildings.
Yes,
And those dollars then get to come back and benefit the school, and that helps this
absolutely.
as well. So that's great. And then the last thing that I just want to share, probably more with the people at home and our audience, when we talk about financial factors in a school district, it's a teaching moment for our kids. We're going to be coming up into a presidential campaign. Everybody gets all focused on a presidential campaign. What you're looking at here, the legislation that Mr. Detweiler mentioned, the Fair School Funding Act, that took, how much does it cost to educate a child, and then consider the barriers and fund that. That's determined by state government. The president has nothing to do with that. So I think it's really important to make sure that our kids know who else represents us and has a voice and on what kind of matters. And to pay attention to those elections too, to know our structure of government and what role each person on that ballot plays, and have some fun with them and educating them through that process. And, you know, so much of what impacts our actual daily lives of what we do or don't do is done in local government at the state level. So just a suggestion there for educating. That's all I have for tonight.
Okay.
Anything else?
Nope.
On that? Okay.
Yep.
Can I get a motion to approve items 37 and 38, please?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Bloom. Could I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Laird. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Ms. Laird,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiritu,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes, motion's approved. All right, moving on to board member communications. Lori.
Well, I'd like to thank Coach Long for his presentation. That was very nice, and it'd be great to see it go through all the sports and maybe even make her a permanent spot. I mean, that'd be really great. And Denise and Bonnie for their presentation on different things that they do in the school. The donations and all the subs and the staff. Congratulations on your spot. Welcome aboard. And just thank you for all the people that help all the kids.
Mary Alice?
I also like to thank Coach Long for his presentation, and Mrs. Hurt and Bonnie, and Megan for her 5-year forecast and all her hard work to put that together. And I would like to wish the staff, our students, and our families a happy holidays.
Chantel?
Echo everybody. Thank you. Everybody sitting here is contributing to the kids, and everybody watching at home does in their own way too. So thank you to all of you. And Miss Lehman, I see you in the audience. Thank you for stepping up to serve, and congratulations to you.
Sarah?
We had Mr. Price and Mr. Detweiler and I had the fortune, and Ms. Parkhurst, I'm sorry, had the fortune of going to the OSBA conference. I'll save some of the other nuggets for next meeting. But I just wanted to, like, on behalf of our school board and our school district, extend our condolences to the Tuscaroras Valley School District. Some of their students were on the way to the OSBA conference to honor one of their board members who is going to be the OSBA president. And they were involved in the bus accident where they had some fatalities of students and volunteers. So just our heartfelt condolences to that school district. While we were at the conference, we were at the walk through the trade show, and we see the TDA booth there. And on the TDA backdrop was our beautiful high school, a picture of our beautiful high school. So they have chosen, our high school to be displayed for their projects. And I just thought that was really cool, just walking through the trade show. And I'm like, oh, that's our school. That's pretty neat. And they just talked about how much they loved working with our district, working with the board, and the administrators on that project. And it was one of their favorite projects. So as a board member and as a community member, that made me feel real good to hear. So thank you to all of you for being here. Welcome aboard. Thank you, Mrs. Hurt, for your presentation. Ms. Arguelles, for your dedication to all of our students. Thank you.
I'll echo what everybody else has said. Thanks, Denise, Bonnie, Coach Long, for all the information tonight and everything moving forward, all the hard work that's put into those programs and everything. to Megan for the 5-year forecast. Most people in private business, I don't have to look out 5 years to determine what my revenue and expenses are at a cookie shop. So most people don't understand that, but it is required by law, and it's a guessing game. It's how do you know what's going to come from the federal and state government 5 years down the road when they don't even know what's going to happen in the next 2 months. So it's one of those things, but thank you for that. So I just have one request. John, you and I have kind of talked about it. I kind of wanted to maybe just put it on the record so that the powers that be that need to be involved in this. So quick, real short story. I don't know his last name. It's my daughter's bus driver, Mr. Ted. And Ava came home one day and she said, Dad, you need to find out what's going on with Mr. Ted. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she said, he hasn't been driving the bus for a couple weeks now. I want to make sure he's okay. So I called John. I texted him actually just to see, and because I looked back, there wasn't a resignation from any Ted. I said, do you know Ted's last name?
Yes.
Mosier.
Mosier? Okay. Sorry, I just call him Mr. Ted because that's what Ava calls him. So anyway, there was no resignation or anything. I thought we're short bus drivers. What's going on? John said, I got to call you with this one. So long story short, correct me if I'm wrong. So Ted goes in, has to re-up the license. He had a vision thing, so he had to go in there to redo it. Got his license renewed, left, has been driving for the last couple years now on that license. Goes back in to renew it again. It has to have a special credential for driving a school bus. The wonderful DMV did not mark the license as being for a school bus. So when he went in to renew it, they said, I'm sorry, this license isn't valid to drive a school bus. And he said, what do you mean? I've been doing it for the last 2 years. And they said, we can't renew this. So long story short, he has taken personal days. He has used up all his vacation days because he couldn't drive. And district has done everything. It went as far as John went and actually called Representative Click to see what he can do. The best answer we get from anybody at the state is Ted did nothing wrong. That's it. No, we'll get that license. So in the meantime, Mr. Ted has had to go back, since he wasn't recertified, he had to go back and start over. It's always harder to start over because now you have to go through like you've never done it before, a little more strict and every stringent than if you're just renewing. So to his credit, he has gone through. He is now driving bus again. Ava is happy that Mr. Ted is, not that she didn't like the other bus driver, but she's only ever had Mr. Ted. My question is just, and I understand that they fall under a union contract and everything, and for the DMV to say that he has done nothing wrong, it was not his mistake, and that he had to use up all those vacation days and everything. I guess my question, it's just a question is there anything, or can whoever needs to look at it and say, I get it. He's lost some days, he's lost pay, he's lost vacation time. Is there a way that we can put that back in? I understand union contracts and there's very strict verbiage on that, but.
Actually, I spoke to our attorney today about that. He's looking into that. I'll let you guys know.
Okay.
Who's looking at what we can do there.
Okay. I just think it's,
Yep.
it's something, I mean, as much as every district is hurting for school bus drivers, the last thing we need to do is make it harder for them to be a part of a district. And then for somebody to use up all their vacation days for somebody else's dumb mistake is just.
We're lucky he didn't go find another job
That's right.
because
Right.
he's not hiring.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you can go in. I mean, yeah. It's just like a teacher and intervention specialist. Every district is hiring a bus driver right now.
That's right.
So, okay. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'll let you know.
All right. With that, can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Bloom. Could I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Spiritu. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiritu,
Yes.
Ms. Laird,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes. Motion's approved. Meeting's adjourned.